Chapter 37. Several days later, when Susan and I went into the village, I stopped at the pub to say hello to Daisy. "Oh, dearie," said her mother, pulling me against her large bosom and kissing the top of my head. "I've sent her away," she said. To Susan, she added, "You'd better send yours too." Across the channel, Hitler's army waited, less than 30 miles away. He invaded the Channel Islands, Guernsey and Jersey, which belonged to England. The Channel Islands surrendered. Kent, which was the part of England where we were, was the closest bit to the German army. In France, when Hitler invaded, he would land in Kent. Susan said nothing to Daisy's mother, but later told Jamie and me not to worry. That was one thing, but until Susan heard from our mother, we were staying put. A few days later, Lady Thornton came to try to make Jamie and me go. All the other evacuees and nearly all the village children were leaving. The WVS, Lady Thornton said, would find a home for us somewhere safe. "Their mother won't know where they are," Susan protested. "Of course she will," Lady Thornton said. "I'll see that you get their new address, and whenever she contacts you, you can pass it on." Susan hesitated. "I'm not sure." Lady Thornton's nose narrowed the way it did when she was angry. "There will be an invasion," she said in a tightly clipped tone. "German soldiers in our streets, in our homes, war in our streets, quite possibly. The children should be as far away as we can send them. Margaret isn't coming home this summer. She's going straight to her new school." I felt a pang of regret. I'd been expecting to see Maggie soon. Lady Thornton said, "You must send them away." Beneath the regret came a bigger wave of emotion, coiling up, rising in my gut. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it meant. I looked out the window and frantically tried to think of butter. "Things worse than bombs," Susan was saying. Lady Thornton shook her head. "War is no time for sentiment." "Is it sentiment?" Susan asked. Her voice sounded far away behind the humming in my ears. Susan put a hand on my shoulder. "Look at them," Susan said. "Look at Ada. If she gets put with the wrong person, she'll go right back to where she was." I shook my head, struggling to stay with them, to hear them above my increasing panic, but Lady Thornton didn't reply. When I risked a glance at her, she was staring at Susan with an expression I couldn't read. "She isn't easy," Susan said, "but I'll fight for her. I do fight for her. Someone has to." At last, Lady Thornton spoke. "I see," she said quietly. "I'm not sure you're correct, but I see what you're saying. But the boy—" "No," Susan said. "Separating them would kill them both." When Lady Thornton had left, Susan sat Jamie and me down beside her on the sofa. She said, "Listen, I'm not sending you away." She talked a long time after that. I heard nothing beyond the words, "not sending you away." The wave inside me flattened out. I could breathe again. "How do you feel about it?" Susan asked me. How did I feel? I had no idea. I didn't know the words to explain. I was choking, and now I can breathe. Susan waited for me to say something. I still felt dizzy, overwhelmed. I swallowed. "I guess I'd rather stay here," I said. "Good," Susan said, "because I'm not giving you a choice." Susan had been right that all the green leaves and grass would come back in summertime. The weather was glorious. Butter's pasture reached his knees, and the vegetables in our victory garden thrived. Fred found an old bicycle in one of the sheds at Thornton House and fixed it up for Jamie to ride. School had closed for good since most of the children were gone, so Jamie came with me every day to help Fred. The former gardener had proved useless around the horses, frightened of them and therefore inclined to smack them around. He'd been called up anyhow. Fred was alone again. Lady Thornton had sold 2 horses and put 3 more down who were past being ridden, but that still left a lot of work to do. The best pastures had been taken over for crops. The government sent land girls to take the place of the enlisted male farm workers. They moved into the old stable boys' apartments. But they only helped with the farming on the estate, not the horses. "Horses aren't important these days," said Fred. Jamie was finally, permanently and completely banned from the airfield. They were too busy to have him around. Planes took off in bunches all day and all night. We could see them high in the sky, tiny specks patrolling the channel, watching, waiting for the invasion that would come. I struggled to fall asleep in the long, bright summer nights. Jamie and Bovril snored in unison, loudly. One night, when the noise grew too much to bear, I crept downstairs to the slightly darker living room. Susan sat on the sofa, her legs curled beneath her, staring into nothing. It was not the deep, sad staring from the year before. "Can't sleep?" she asked when she saw me. I shook my head. Susan patted the sofa beside her. I walked across the room and stood in front of her, my good foot and the crutch tips deep in the plush rug, the toes of my bad foot barely brushing the ground. "Everyone still thinks I should send you away," Susan said. I nodded. Lady Thornton said it so often. I went to Susan's WVS meetings sometimes to help sew. And Lady Thornton made a noise in the back of her throat every time she saw me. "Part of me does agree," Susan continued. "I know they mean well, but I also understand now why some of the mothers from London took their evacuated children back so soon. Some things you've got to face as a family." Hitler was in Paris. He could be in London next week. "For the longest time," Susan went on, "I thought I was neglecting you. I didn't take care of you the way my mother took care of my brothers and me. My mother watched me all the time. She always kept me neatly dressed. She ironed my shoelaces. She would never have let you run wild the way I have. But now, when I look at you, I think I didn't do so badly. I think you wouldn't have liked being raised the way my mother raised me. What do you think, Ada?" I sat down on the sofa. "I never know," I said. "When I'm not thinking, everything's clear in my head, but as soon as I try to look at it, I get confused." I leaned against the back of the sofa. "I understand," Susan said. "Sometimes I feel like that too." I leaned my head against her, the tiniest bit. She didn't move. I leaned a little more. She put her arm around my shoulders so that I was nestled against her. As I drifted into sleep, I thought I felt her lips brush the top of my head. The first air raid was worse than Christmas Eve. And that is the end of chapter 37.